Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. I'm Nick, the Director of Events for the store. Today, I have two wonderful mystery thriller authors. We don't get too many of them these days, so this is always a treat. We have Scott Shepherd and Brian Freeman here discussing their various books. I want to make sure I got them in order. Should I Fall? And The Bourne Sacrifice. As you see, I have little things popping out of them, because if you haven't yet got your own copy of these books, yes, through Mysterious Galaxy, what are you waiting for? Come on. You click a link below. They'll take you to our webpage where you can purchase both Scott and Brian's books. And inside of them, you will get a signed book plate from each one of the authors. I was holding that upside down.
Well, I'm usually upside down, so
for those of you who are joining us and haven't had a chance to read any of these authors' works before, Scott Shepherd is a veteran writer, producer, showrunner with years of experience running network series. His production and screenwriting credits include The Equalizer, Miami Vice, a personal favorite of mine, The Outer Limits, Haven, and Quantum Leap, another great show. Brian Freeman is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of more than 24 psychological thrillers, including the Jonathan Stride series and multiple popular standalone novels. He has also been selected by the Robert Ludlum series estate to take over the London iconic Jason Bourne series, which is why we have this book today. If you have any questions that you want to ask these two wonderful authors in the program, you'll see there's another link below. This is Ask a Question. Submit those questions there. I'll pop up later on in the discussion to ask those both of Scott and Brian. I think I did enough of gabbing, so I'm going to leave it to these two authors to take it away. I'll see y'all later.
Thanks, Nick.
Well, Scott, here we are.
Here we are again.
It feels like we should just kind of, have our usual conversation here. Oh, wait, there's people watching us. So
yeah, we usually, like every month, we kind of get together and just catch up. I'm in California. Brian, you're usually in Minnesota. Are you in Minnesota?
Yes, I'm in Minnesota. Yes, it's one of those rare times of the year here where the weather is absolutely gorgeous outside. So,
and as the people who are in San Diego know, we're having our one big heat wave. So if you see the lights start to dim, it's like they're flexing, I think.
my gosh, Nick is writing, "Ow, I love Chaska." Wow, Nick, that's some real Minnesota cred there. If you know where Chaska is, I'm very impressed. So.
What is Chaska?
It's a suburb on the west side of Minneapolis. Got family there. Okay, very good, very good. Well, Scott, I've had the good fortune to read both of your Austin Grant novels, The Last Commandment and Should I Fall, and I thoroughly enjoyed both of them. But if I had to pick a favorite, I gotta say I really loved Should I Fall. I thought that was a terrific book.
And I've had the opportunity not only to read most of the Stride novels. I think I was saying to you the other day, I mean, Brian's written how many books? 23, 22, in the 20s, right?
Yeah, the Zero Night comes out in November. That'll be number 25. So.
Wow. I've written 4, so it's kind of like I'm in awe. I've been able to, I've got to read all 3 of the Bourne books and most of the Stride, and I think 17 or 18 of your novels. I saved them, so when I want something like for a nice weekend, I can say, oh, I haven't finished all of Brian's books. But you're writing quick enough that if I wait long enough, another one's going to show up, I think.
Well, I've had a rather amazing last 3 years. I wrote 3 books a year for the last 3 years. So I was determined, to leapfrog some of my competitors that came out at the same time in quantity here. So, but I've only written 1 book so far this year. I really feel like I'm slacking off. But literally just today, I wrapped up the first draft of the 4th Jason Bourne novel, so I'm very, very happy about that. So
yeah, you go off and do it, and I go off and do a television series in between books is what I do. So it's like we kind of have our own juggle thing. Well, so speaking of the 4th, but the 3, why don't you tell us about the Bourne books, and then I can tell us about the newest Bourne book, the one that just came out. I'm really excited to have The Bourne Sacrifice out in the marketplace right now, and I took over the Bourne series 3 years ago, and it's been a lot of fun. I mean, when they first asked me to do it, my first reaction was sort of, oh my God, taking over the Bourne series. And my next reaction was sort of, oh my God, because there's that intimidation factor of stepping into the shoes
a giant in the genre like Robert Ludlum, and certainly an iconic hero like Jason Bourne. And I talked to the folks at Putnam about how to make this work, because there have been so many iterations of Bourne over the years. I mean, you had 3 Robert Ludlum novels about Bourne. You had Eric von Lustbader doing, I think it was 10 or 11 Bourne novels, and then obviously all of the great Matt Damon movies. And actually, I may be one of the few people who remember that before Matt Damon was Jason Bourne, Richard Chamberlain.
That's right.
Was actually Jason Bourne in an NBC miniseries with Jacqueline Smith as Marie St. Jacques. But so there have been so many iterations of Bourne. All of them, I think, painting a very different picture of
Jeremy Renner did it too, right? And then
he wasn't actually Bourne, but
he was under the franchise.
It was a Bourne novel, The Bourne Legacy, but he wasn't actually playing Bourne. But that's the thing. I mean, there have been so many different takes on who Bourne is, and I said, I think if you try to sort of create a melange of all of those things, it's not going to work. And so my vision was to go back to who Jason Bourne was in Ludlum's first book, in The Bourne Identity, and really recreate an authentic vision of that character, and then take that character and drop him down into a modern setting with all new plots, all new characters around him. So essentially, I was trying to reboot the entire series. You don't have to have read any of the other books. You don't have to have seen the movies to really, sort of dive right into my Bourne novels. And so that's been what I've tried to do with the Bourne Evolution, and then the Bourne Treachery, and now the Bourne Sacrifice. And the first one, the Bourne Evolution, was sort of an homage to Ludlum and the Bourne Identity, and I found myself kind of struggling a bit with the second book, with Treachery, because I realized that I needed to give myself permission to kind of take ownership of the series and to let Bourne evolve and change as a hero based on what was going on in my books, and so being sort of willing to share ownership of the character with Ludlum. And once I did that, it kind of loosened up everything for me. And so I've had a lot of fun just allowing Bourne now to grow and change and evolve with everything that's happening to him in these books. And the Bourne Sacrifice, brings together Bourne with a character from the Bourne Evolution, Abigail Raw, this Canadian journalist. And Bourne comes across in the movies as sort of this iconic, this laconic, sort of isolated hero. That's not really who he is. He needs someone in his life. And so Bourne and Abby have this very passionate but also complicated relationship, because Bourne's always trying to push her away, and they're in the midst of this wonderful media conspiracy. Ludlum's books did such a great job of playing off the dramatic conspiracies of his day, whether it was Vietnam or Watergate or echoes of the Nazi period, and so I wanted to be able to kind of do the same sort of thing in my Bourne books, and so the Bourne Sacrifice is just filled with cancel culture and deep fakes and all these other wonderfully conspiratorial things going on in the media. So you put it all together, it's propulsive, it's fast paced. It was a lot of fun to write, and I hope it's a lot of fun to read as well.
Well, I think, having read all 3, and I can't wait for the 4th, I think, it's funny. I was thinking about, the different iterations of Bourne, and obviously remembering the Ludlum books. I think I've read 1 or 2 of the Lustbader books, but I've seen all the films, and being a big fan of the James Bond series from the books to the different iterations of the movies. What I feel, if you like the Daniel Craig James Bond movies and how that feel like that reinvigorated and reinvented the classic character, and actually started by doing Casino Royale, which was the first Bond book, and was very true to that book, and was really one of the best Bond movies, I think. And then that became the standpoint of his version of James Bond. And I think with the Craig movies they've done, I think they did 5. The last one is the last one, I think, is the arc that has gone through that. It felt like that was sort of what I thought you successfully really approached so far in the Bourne series, in the sense that there's an overriding couple of people who spread through the books. You have a nice arch villain who goes through the books, but each book in and of its own is a case or an adventure, so to speak, that has a beginning, middle, and an end. So I think you could jump in, which was some of the things I thought about when I wrote the second book to this series, that you want somebody to feel like, do I have to read everything to get up to this point? I mean, it was one of the things where I kind of joke around with you. I think that your 11th Jonathan Stride novel is coming out in October. And oh, there it is. I haven't gotten that yet. And, you know, I've read the first, you know, when we first became friends over a few years ago, I'd read the first 4 or 5 and I'm going, I wanted to read them, but I said you've been able to do the same thing. So I think to me, we should just dive in what you need to know in the Bourne Sacrifice. I think you'll absolutely be able to propel forward. And then, of course, what you want to do after you read that, you want to go back and read the other 2, probably in order at that point.
Yeah, and that's always the delicate balancing act of series books, is that you want to write them so that new readers can discover you with each new book, and they don't feel like they have to, you know, go through all the books to get to that point. And yet, you know, it's like meeting a friend later in life. I mean, you want to be able to, if you meet them, you enjoy their stories, you want to go back and kind of find out what brought them to that point in life. And that's the way I feel about a series, is you should be able to dive in anywhere in the series and get a full, rich understanding of the characters, and then you can go back and kind of figure out how they got there.
Well, it's funny. I had a discussion with a novelist today. We were talking about this, and I said, if we're doing our job right, telling stories, even on television, but with the books, I make it akin to, and I think here's the 30-40 year spoiler alert. If you haven't seen The Empire Strikes Back by now, shame on you. But I think we all know who Luke Skywalker's father is, right? And that was such a big reveal when you watch those films. And the thing, I think, you know, those were the middle stories of the Star Wars thing. He started with that. And then when, you know, the first 3 they did, which weren't as good as the original 3, but episodes 1, 2, and 3, the thing that made that really interesting, and you could get through those movies at points, was you were always knowing Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, and I'm watching how that evolves. So, you know, to me, if you enter a book series at a certain point, if the author's doing their job right, like you say, you can read the books that come before it with sort of the thrill saying, okay, I know these 2 characters are going to do this, or this character, but I want to see how that comes about. And I think you could easily do that, you know, in, you know, with the Bourne books. I mean, you know, in terms of bridging to, like, you know, to Should I Fall, which is the second book in a series of mystery novels that I wrote. The first one, The Last Commandment, last summer. This is it's about three main characters. One of them being, and it was really the focus of the first book, is Austin Grant, who is a Scotland Yard commander, former Scotland Yard commander in this current book. Because what's happened is he's just recently retired, which has things to do with the first book. And in that first book, he got pulled into a case 3 weeks before he's going to retire. He was estranged from his daughter, Rachel, who he hadn't seen in a year. And he, you know, he's based in London. He got drawn to New York, where he ended up having to work with a young New York cop named John Frankel. And over the course of the book, what happens is they solve this case that starts in New York and goes back to London. And he reunites with his daughter, and the daughter, Rachel, falls in love with Frankel. Interestingly enough, that is something in the first book that's kind of withheld for a long time. And I couldn't talk about that, but it's impossible to talk about the second book without saying that Rachel and Frankel are a couple, because this book takes place 6 months after the first book, and they're about to be married. And the prologue of the book, I think, sets up the book, is the fact that she's about to go back from New York, where she's living, you know, on and off with Frankel. They're going to be married in London. And so she's about to fly to London in the prologue of the book to go meet her father, who's retired, and, you know, who's going to throw a wedding for her. And she picks up in the first page of the book, she picks up her, the wedding rings and an engagement present of a set of cufflinks she wants to give John. What she does, she decides to go to his apartment, and she's going to go in his apartment. She's going to put the cufflinks in his suitcase. So when she's leaving early to prepare the wedding, when he shows up a week later, he'll open his suitcase and there will be her wedding present to him. So she unlocks the door to this, you know, one bedroom, this studio apartment in Murray Hill in New York. And there, lying dead on the floor, is this woman, Julia, she's only heard about, but it's Frankel's ex-wife, who left him 2 years, and she's been shot to death, and she is dead in her betrothed's apartment a week before they're going to get married. And from that point on, the first call she makes when she can't find her husband, who to be is missing, she calls her father in London. And the next thing you know, instead of her going to London, the retired Scotland Yard commander, Austin Grant, comes to help his daughter to figure out what exactly happened. And is this man you're about to marry, who's about to be my son-in-law, the person we think he is, or is there something else? And then the game's afoot from there. And that's what Should I Fall is about.
Yeah, you know, as I say, I read both of them, and what I thought was interesting was it seemed to me that The Last Commandment was a little harder edged than Should I Fall. I mean, it's sort of more of a serial killer theme in the book, a little more violent, and I mean, both great books, but I thought very different kind of tone between The Last Commandment and Should I Fall. And one thing I mean, I loved the mystery of Should I Fall, but what really what I really enjoyed about it was all the characters are just really engaging. I mean, I just enjoyed spending time with them, and you know, as that seems like it ought to be sort of a fundamental for any book, and yet, you know, books, TVs, there's an awful lot of shows and stories out there where you find like there's no one that you really sort of enjoy spending time with, and I always wonder why, you know, an artist is doing that, because I think it's so important that you have characters that you know, readers want to spend time with, and I thought that was terrific in Should I Fall. I mean, I just thoroughly enjoyed spending time with these people. I read it slowly because I wanted to really, you know, enjoy spending time with them.
Well, you know, it's nice. Thank you for saying that. I think it's also one of the reasons it works in the Bourne books, because of the characters you bring back from your first and second, you know, books in the series. You know, there's a couple characters who come, but like you say, the reporter who's in this one, and then in the second book, I remember there's a character from the first book who shows up, and because you're invested in them, for good or for bad, I think it becomes something you're interested in. And I think people really did enjoy The Last Commandment, but to a fault, everybody who's read the second one like it better. And I think it comes from just, you know, the characters you bring. I don't think it's baggage. You bring a rootability. And I think that comes from, I mean, like you do, I have thousands of books, and a lot of it are continuing series. To your point, we've talked a lot about your Stride series, you know, Jonathan Stride, the police detective, and his offgoing relationship with this woman, Serena. And it's the thing that's the engine of those books. I mean, there's lots of familiar characters, but it's rooting for that relationship, you know? Yeah. And I've said that, you know, and so to me, it's really, you know, even though the engine of the serial killer in the first book, I had a friend who kind of said, I didn't want to read The Last Commandment because he said it's a serial killer book. I go, well, it really isn't. It's really the machination that gets these people together so I can write about their relationships.
Yeah, it's not an explicitly violent book.
And I was just reading, you know, like a writer who I've read for years, and I'm still way behind her books. She's written like 27 of them, but Faye Kellerman, who's Jonathan Kellerman's wife, who writes this series about Lazarus Decker, about the rabbi's widow, Rena, you know, Rena Lazarus, who falls in love with this, you know, non-Jewish cop, you know, in a mystery in the first book, and it develops their relationship over 25 books. And she just expands the family. Kids are born, and she finds, like, in every book, it was like a seminal event to write about in one or two of the characters' lives, and then wraps a mystery around it. And in the first book, it was about his retirement and his estrangement from his daughter. And in this, it's a wedding. And I like to say, and I definitely want to take these books forward. There's like 3 love stories here. There's a love story between, obviously, Rachel and, you know, Frankel, who are destined to be husband and wife, daughter and father. And then there's even the 2 cops, because it's sort of like the love of a buddy story, you know, like a buddy cop story. Because the reason we love all those buddy things is because those are love stories, you know. I mean, between usually 2 guys, but guy and a girl.
Well, and I think we've talked about this too. And I know I did an event last year with Tom Colgan at Putnam when the Bourne Treasury came out, and we were talking about, you know, series books, and I was saying I feel that series books don't die because of the plots. They die because the characters get stale. I mean, if you simply take a static character and simply keep putting new plots around the same hero, I think pretty quickly, you know, readers are going to get tired of that. I mean, the characters need to feel 3-dimensional. They need to keep growing and evolving and changing. Certainly Jonathan Stride in Funeral for a Friend and The Zero Night, very different man today than how he was in Immoral when we first met him back in 2005, because of all the things that have happened to him along the way. And so, I mean, I think that's, you know, as you talk about Faye's books, I mean, I think that's what keeps a series alive, is the characters continue to really evolve. And certainly when I'm starting a new series book, I'm not first thinking about the plot. I'm thinking, where are these characters in their lives, and what are sort of the key challenges, personally, emotionally, psychologically, that they're facing. And then I start building a mystery around something that's going to sort of pull that out and force the character to have to deal with that.
Well, funny, it's like, and that's how we kind of work on television shows. I mean, they're really successful shows. I've had an opportunity, different times to work on it, and I really understand why they're really successful in the crime genre, whether it's the CSIs, the Law and Orders. I appreciate how good those shows are, but they're very plot, case of the week. And so I never drifted to those kind of shows. I looked at shows that might have had standalones, but I like the novel sort of storytelling. And like the show we just have that's coming on next Sunday, there's a show called Monarch that's coming on Fox. It was the show I went to go do over the last 7 months. And it's a country western soap opera with murder and mystery and great musical numbers. And it's really fun. It's with Susan Sarandon and Trace Atkins, the country singer, and Anna Friel. Well, so, we're hoping it does well. We've done the first year. If we all come back in the second year, to your point, Brian, the reason I say this is the first thing we're going to sit and talk about is we're going to say, here are the 8-9 characters of this extended family. This is where we're starting season 2. Where do we want them to end up season 2? Emotionally, who's coming into their lives? Might we lose somebody, or not? And look, that's been one of the great things about television, and how, the really television everybody talks about, whether it's Game of Thrones and other shows that people are dying in shows that they now do. It's the novel approach to television, because what people are reacting to are seeing these characters that it might not be safe for them to live all the way through, or something horrible might happen to them. And, and I feel but to me, it's buried in our novels. One of the, I've been on events where people say, what books influence you in terms of the writing of things? And I talk about Dennis Lehane, who's a wonderful writer, and his series of books, especially the first 5 about Angie and Patrick, the 2 cops who are in love with each other, but are apart in Boston in those books. And they made the one movie, which is a really good movie. It's Ben Affleck's first movie he directed, Gone Baby Gone, a really, really good movie that at the end is pretty, rips your heart out about something that happens with those characters. And I remember it was good in the movie, but I remember that was the 4th of the 5 books he wrote, because you were so invested in those characters reading the first 3 books. When you got to that ending that was in the book, it was 10 times more powerful, because you brought these characters into your home, whether they're in books, television, and you care about them. You can't help but care about them.
Well, and we've spent a lot of time, talking about series books, but I will also put in a plug for standalones, because of course I have a new.
Yes, it's a really good book.
Well, and I think one of the things I like about doing a bunch of standalones as well is you can sort of take risks and with the storytelling and the characters and standalones that you might not do in a series. I mean, there are sort of natural constraints that are going to be put on what I might do with Jonathan Stride or Jason Bourne based on the kinds of stories that work for that character. Whereas in my standalones, I can kind of go out on a limb and have fun with different storytelling. And I remember he's a good example of that. I love the fact that a lot of the reviewers have been sort of comparing it to Michael Crichton.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, going from Robert Ludlum and Michael Crichton, I figure, well, that's kind of fun. So, but
the thing is, you don't have to, in standalones, you don't have to pay for wherever you leave anybody, because in a series, you have to come back to deal with whatever you wrought, right?
Yeah,
standalone, you can do whatever you want at the end, and that's it.
Yeah, and so and I remember, I love the setup. I mean,
tell everybody what the setup is.
It's told by this young woman, Hallie Evers, and Hallie actually dies at the beginning of the book. Her heart stops at a rooftop party in Las Vegas, and when she's revived and wakes up in the hospital, the doctor who revived her has disappeared, and she has all of these strange visions and dreams in her mind that they feel more like memories, and so she's seeing images of people that she doesn't know, and yet she does know them, and she ends up talking to this person about the city of Boston, and she can talk in detail about places in Boston and knows exactly what's around every corner, and yet tells us, I've never been to Boston in my life. How is this possible? So and all the twists and turns go from there. But as I say, very, very different from a Bourne novel or a Stride novel. But it gives me a chance to kind of do a very different kind of storytelling, and something that sort of grazes a little bit on sci-fi, a sort of out there medical thriller. But I always say, look, if you're looking for my brand, I always look at kind of Tom Hanks movies. You never know what he's going to do next, but if he's going to be in it, you're going to get a great experience.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I think of the book, your standalone Infinite, right? The one from last year, is in the same sort of realm. It's got, it's a little bit of sliding doors ish to save everything else. But again, it's sort of light sci-fi, but it's character, emotional sci-fi. I did The Outer Limits, was one of the shows that I did when it got rebooted 20 years ago. And a buddy of mine and I, the way that show worked, the year we did it, was you do 22 episodes. He was responsible for 11. I was responsible for 11. He did the much harder edged, very techie sci-fi. I don't understand how a computer barely works. And I would do the emotional, sci-fi. Like, to me, that's why I like the Terminator, because it's about a mother coming back to protect her son. He would be more about doing the Terminator stuff, and so to me, I think what's great, you could say you don't know what you're getting, but what I do think is I get from your books is a sense of characters you care about, you want to go on that journey. And then the other thing you do, and I think it applies to both our books, and we've talked about this in the past amongst ourselves, is how important a sense of place is. Yeah. In terms of, and very often I've read lots of your reviews of your books, and everybody talks, and I think it's one of the things they talk about, you being someone who, a sense of place, that you're actually there when you do that. And the Bourne books, to me, I'll just say, what I remember about the Bourne books, I love the fact that they're kind of travel logs. That's what Ludlum was. I remember that he would just gallivant whatever tale he was telling. I felt like I was vicariously going to these places, right? Right, absolutely. The business does that really well. He hits the top of the bestseller list every year. Is Daniel Silva does that, right? The Gabrielle Allon books are doing that. I mean, so isn't place really important to you? I mean, because
I think setting really enriches the drama of a thriller. So, I mean, I'm always selecting the location of each chapter very carefully to sort of enhance the suspense of what's going on between the characters. And I want to give readers that you are there feel. You've been dropped down in every scene, sort of like an invisible observer, and you can hear it and touch it and taste it and smell it and feel it happening all around you.
Yeah, I mean, I know that in the first book, The Last Command was an idea. I thought it was a movie idea like 30 years ago. I never got around to it. I'm always so busy doing television. I wasn't writing books at that point. And then I wanted to become a book series. And London and New York are literally the fourth characters in the book. Yeah. And there's sort of love letters to both those cities. My wife would say, they're staying kind of in nice places. I said, can they afford that? I go, I don't care. It's a wish fulfillment.
Bourne stays in some pretty nice places too.
Yeah. Well, in the spy world, or the former spy world, you can do it. But what's really funny in terms of Should I Fall, in the first book, I was right before I turned it in to see someone who's going to publish it. I had mentioned that Frankel's wife had left him for the super, and they were opening a beach bar in the Caribbean somewhere, because I figured New York, Caribbean, and I've never been to the Caribbean. I mean, I live on the West Coast, but where I do go a lot, my wife and we go to the big island of Hawaii a ton, and we've been there like 25, 30 times, and there's all these places. So right before, I didn't need to have an idea for the second book. I said, I'm just going to put that he went to the big island of Hawaii with her, right?
I love the Hawaii scenes in there. That's great.
Well, and the second part of this 4-part book is really Grant and his daughter going to Hawaii. And it's sort of like, to me,
I felt like I should be making a Mai Tai while I was reading it. So.
Well, the funny thing was, to me, it was kind of like, to me, it's sort of that idea that the week before you get married, you spend time with a parent of both your parents. It's the last time as a single person you might do that. And this would be a father and daughter have been put together at the end of the first book, and they're getting along. So they take a trip. They would take a trip. Maybe they go to Hawaii together or something. Well, they're going there, but they're looking into a murder case. But it also allowed me to write about someplace I loved, and became like a travel log and kept it active.
Yeah. Well, and that's been one of the challenges over the past couple of years. Is normally what I like to be able to do is go to locations and and scout them the way a film director would. And in the midst of COVID, I couldn't really be doing that. So I ended up using a lot of locales in the Bourne books that I had been to at other points of my life. So I knew the locations and was just able to pour them into these. So.
Well, so you live in Minnesota, so at least a lot of the Stride books take place up there. My first book took place in LA and mostly in Palm Springs, with a noir book that becomes something else. But I've really never really written about Los Angeles. It's like, I've been writing about the places that I kind of like to go. At some point, I'm sure I will. I'll bring these characters here if that becomes the next thing. you know, in terms of doing that. And so you've finished. So the fourth book is, you know, so Bourne is the next thing. You just finished the one that comes out next year, right? Is that the idea?
Yes, that will be the Bourne Defiance. I assume it'll come out next July. All of them have come out in July. So I confess, the Bourne Sacrifice, fastest novel I have ever written in my life. It was due January 31st. And as of early December, I think I only had about 20,000 words done. And so I wrote about 80 to 85,000 words in 6 weeks. It was just insane. And yet it fits perfectly for the propulsion of a Bourne narrative. I mean, it actually worked out really well. But I also swore I was never going to be doing that again. So this year, the next book is still due January 31st, but I've already got the draft done. So I'm feeling.
So that's very impressive. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? I used to say, when I was in college, I was an English major and I never had any tests. And you have a paper that was due, like a 30, 40 page paper. And I'd wait till the night before it was done. Right. You know, and I'd write this 40 page paper and I'm going like, I couldn't wait to get out of college because I say, I will never, ever, ever have to do this again. So what have I been doing for 3 or 4 decades? I've been writing television shows where there's a gun to your head all the time.
Yeah,
write this, can you write it in 3 days? No, you can write it in 2 days. And for a long time, I would have the same horrible, like fear of waking up in a public place naked, you know, pressure of like, you know, having to write it. But now I kind of depend on that. I mean, it becomes
it does kind of feed your adrenaline, and I don't know, I think it may make you a little more creative. But then again, I was able to take my time a little bit on the fourth one, and I love how the fourth one has come together. So,
but the other thing is,
but that's also an interesting thing about series is, you know, because I was trying to reinvent and reboot the Bourne series, I feel like I'm probably going to end up doing that again a little bit in book 5, because I feel like you have to sort of, you know, you have to step back in series and find ways to inject new life into them. And you don't want to make the readers feel that they have to go all the way back to the beginning to enjoy the books. You want to really be able to sort of give them that new shot of energy, new characters, to feel like, okay, you can embrace them later on and then go back and read the other ones when you have time.
That's kind of, again, doing multiple TV shows, seasons, what you do is you finish up an arc, you know, through the course, and you finish that. But of course, in that last episode, you start to lay a couple things saying, oh, well, then next year we're going to come back and
out those things. Yes, exactly.
You know, in terms of, because otherwise, you know, at some point, then we go, okay, the story's like over, right? In terms of doing it.
Well, you know, and I don't know how it is on the screenwriting side, but I know in the novels, I find that things will pop in as I'm getting toward the end of the book. And I have no idea whether they're going to be important, you know, in future books or, you know, I don't have any intention necessarily of pulling it out, you know, and yet when I start looking at the next book, I take a look at what, you know, the other book showed me and it's like, oh, I could do something there. So it's at the end of the Bourne Defiance, it doesn't give anything away, but toward the end, there's this very minor character that Bourne meets, this other blonde Treadstone agent who goes by the code name Vandal, and I was like, you know, she's only in there for a couple of pages, but it's like, yeah, I could see her making a reappearance in the next book. So.
Well, it's funny because, you know, The Last Commandment, the book prior to this, and it was always sort of an idea of a movie. I mean, it's so long ago. It was like Sean Connery at 60 and Robert De Niro at 35. You know, was the idea. And it was much tougher. And like you say, it was a little more propulsive. And I think that stayed in the idea of the telling because of the serial killer thing. And I think it was more of a fish out of water. I had never been to London when I thought of it years ago. And I think it was like at the height of the Lethal Weapon movies. I thought this is an interesting two fish out of water. And then I'm writing the book, you know, the first one. And there's a discussion really early on that it was just between the two men sitting in a cafe that used to be in a little coffee shop in the building I used to live in New York. And they start talking. And suddenly I just had Frankel start. I was writing about him talking about why he never took the wedding ring off his finger, you know, and it was this kind of kinder, surprising side to him. And I'm going, that character sort of evolved as I was writing it. And and it's like he's become a much more sensitive man as I've kind of gone through it, and I like him better. And I find it makes him there's more tragic flaws and everything in terms of doing it. And I also find, you know, sometimes I don't even know where I'm going to end something. I figure it out as I go along.
Right.
And look, and here's Nick.
Nick, welcome back.
Hello. It is that time in the discussion where we have the audience Q&A. If you have any questions you would like to submit and have Scott and Brian answer, go ahead and hit the ask question below. We have a few already. So first up for you gentlemen, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. So this one is for Brian. After writing the Bourne series for so long, do you still need to check with the estate with each book, or do they trust your work at this point?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, that was one of the things I was a little nervous about when I first took on the Bourne series, was exactly sort of how much control the estate was going to want to take over what I was doing. And I have to say both Putnam and the estate have been absolutely terrific to work with. They've really given me free reign. They've been very supportive. When I turned in the Bourne Evolution, Putnam sent it on to the estate, and they came back and said, we don't want to change a word. So I thought that's terrific. And it means I try to respond to that by, I push the envelope a little bit. So in the Bourne Sacrifice, I actually have pulled in another of Ludlum novels. One of my favorite Ludlum books of all time was the Chancellor Manuscript. And I always thought it would be great to get Peter Chancellor, who is this very sort of Ludlum-esque thriller writer, into a Bourne book. And so I combined them all in the Bourne Sacrifice. And I was a little nervous that the estate would sort of have some intellectual property problems with that. But they must have run it by the lawyers and said, okay, because they gave me the green light. So
that's funny, because when you come across that character, because now at the start of the book, and I went, wait a second. And I went like in my back room where I had the whole Ludlum novels, and I go, sure enough, and now he's age appropriate. And it's like, I thought that was very,
unlike Bourne, who has managed to get younger over the years. Yeah.
I love doing that. I love doing that, where you actually, I think in my first two books, in the first book, I had a movie being made about a book, which was the book I was going to write. It's like for my own entertainment, but it worked.
Exactly. You got to have inside jokes.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, that's good. That just shows how much they trust you and your and their confidence they have for you in writing that. This one's for Scott. What research went into Should I Fall? And I know it takes place in England.
Actually, Should I Fall? The first one is in England. It takes place in England. The second one takes place in New York, Maine, and Hawaii. And so, I'm not a big research. I only research because when I have to. I kind of like it's like somebody, when I taught for 7 years at UT at the same time we were teaching screenwriting, and my partner, who I also write screenplays with, she says to the students who are all the writing, she says, there's a lot of things I don't know how to do, but the one thing I know how to do is I know how to make up crap, is what she said. And so people go, what do you do for a living? I said, that's what I do, is I make up stuff. And I'd rather make up stuff. But so like the Hawaii thing was saying, well, I've been there a lot of times. I can write about that. I've spent a lot of time in New York and love New York. But Maine I'd been there once, and the book spent some time in Maine, and I had a glorified, romanticized version of it. And I did that. But I mean, there were certain things that if I have to, like when I was deciding, is he a commander? Who's his boss at Scotland Yard? I have a little chart somewhere where there's that. And there was a place I wanted to end the first book. So I got maps of that place and then made up my own thing. But I try and kind of go like, I'm going to say what I want to go do, and I'm going to go find research that will substantiate that, is what I end up doing.
Well, and research is always kind of a delicate balancing act. I mean, I remember seeing an interview with Ludlum, years and years and years ago, where they asked him about the research he did in his books, and I loved his answer. He said, "Well, I do less research than my readers think, and more than my family believes." Which that's kind of my philosophy too. But research. I mean, if you do it well, it just gives it that era of authenticity. And one of the things I love about I Remember You is that a good chunk of the book of I Remember You is set in Boston. And so, I mean, it's very, very intricate in terms of the Boston locales. And I had a reader from Boston who just wrote to me a couple days ago saying how much she loved the book, and said, boy, you were so dead on the Boston locales. You must have spent a lot of time here. And I felt a little like Hallie Evers, who knew all about Boston and had never actually been there in her life, because I've only been to Boston once, and it was like 25 years ago. So that's the power of research.
And I know there's readers who are sticklers on certain bits of information, like gun types and yes, guns in particular, and rankings and stuff. So have either one of you, kind of connected to that, have either one of you been called out for like a misresearch on a gun type or some sort of like rank in like the police? Oh no.
You don't want to mess with the guns. Yeah.
Oh gosh. As an American, yes, no, I understand that.
I haven't been, but I keep it as generic as possible. You know,
Safe bet.
I mean, luckily in television we have people who double check all that stuff, and they, you know, they go, oh, you can't do that, you know. So
yeah, I'm just not a gun guy, and it seems odd for a thriller writer, but I've never fired a gun in my life and have no intention of doing so. But I try to do enough research that I don't get myself into too much trouble. But if I do, there are plenty of readers who are happy to set me straight. So.
Oh boy, we know about that. All right, this one is for both of you. What drew and continues to draw you both to mystery and thriller stories?
I mean, what drew me probably as a kid, the first books I read were the Hardywood books when I was a little boy. And my paternal grandmother, who lived in Kansas City, she used to bring me to the Hardywood books. And I loved the adventure. And what I love particularly, is, probably why I ended up at series television, is I love the end of it where they go, and then what Joe and Frank didn't know is they were about to get involved in the house of the secret of the old mill. I'm like, oh, that's going to be the next one.
Yeah.
So that started that, and then I discovered when I was in my teens, I discovered Ross McDonald, and I thought they were the greatest. And they were and at that point they were seen by the New York Times as the greatest series of detective novels ever written by an American. I think they are, and that was it. I was off to the races, and every story has there's a beginning, middle, and end. The interesting thing is when I was at Stanford years ago, I did take a course on the literature of fantasy. I was teaching courses for, this is 35, 40 years ago at Stanford on the detective novels because I really liked them. But they also had a thing called literature of fantasy. And one of the books they put in the literature of fantasy was The Big Sleep, because they said the detective novel is literature of fantasy because it is predicated on everything being start to middle to end, everything connects, every piece, and that is fantastical. I go, well, that's a nice order from my world's unorderly, so that is, and I think that's what I like.
Yeah, I think, I grew up reading mysteries as a kid too. I got a lot of that from my grandmother. I remember she was the big mystery reader in the family, and she would tell me, "Oh, I'm reading this great new book. It's got lots of bodies in it." So. That was how I grew up. So I love that. I think Scott's right. I mean, it's important that mysteries have a beginning, middle, and end, even though I sometimes sort of, I like to have things in shades of gray, not black and white. But I think there is this sense that in many cases, we don't get the truth, or we don't get justice in the world when bad things happen, and we're left with a lot of unsolved mysteries that just haunt us as to what really happened. And the advantage of being a mystery writer is you can actually put closure on those kinds of things. And I also think that the mystery and the thriller genre gives you the opportunity to put people in some extreme situations. And I think when you do that, you really get to sort of know who they really are, and you get to understand them as people, and they're put in situations where their real character has to emerge. And for someone like Bourne, I mean, I think that's what makes Bourne such an interesting character. His whole essence is that he's struggling with his identity. He doesn't know who he is. He's lost his memory, and so he's kind of constantly dealing with that struggle of what kind of a man am I? And I think on a less extreme, less dramatic level, those are the sorts of things that we all face, and so the genre helps us deal with that.
Yeah, and I think it's also a safe, it allows you to do something that's fun and exciting. Like, I'm not going to jump off a cliff or paraglide or, hunt down a serial killer. But, when you're in the safety of your room, reading a book, or, watching a show, you can feel like you can get on the roller coaster and it'll be safe and it won't go spinning off into the ocean.
Yeah, and then there was Clive Cussler. I mean, come on, all the other writers were sitting there in our offices. We never want to go outside, and Cussler's sitting there down in submarines, and he was more adventurous than Dirk Pitt. I mean,
exactly. Somebody has to do it.
I guess.
Great reasons. Another one for both of you. Because you both have to constantly deal with death and intrigue, do you need to do anything special to decompress from your writing work?
I mean, I play golf, and so I get out and walk 18 holes 2 or 3 times a week in the mornings to clear my head. And then I don't know. I mean, it's weird. I think I just keep feeding my brain until it's just exhausting, and then I just fall asleep exhausted because the last thing I do at night is read. And so, my wife and I, especially during the pandemic, the last 2.5 years, we usually spend the last 2 hours every evening watching something, a show. So I'm still like feeding that. But I think to me, I just know that's the way my brain works. The more involved it is, the calmer I get. I actually wrote, I remember saying, like, I remember talking to a shrink a long time ago about something about biofeedback, and he said, and they were saying, when it was like one of these things, my brain was getting calmer and calmer the more problems they give me. He said, sit on the beach and think about nothing. We're like, eh. so that's the way my brain works. I don't need it, I think.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, because writing is such an all-consuming sort of profession. It's not like you can just leave these characters aside at 5 o'clock and go and forget about all of that. I mean, the characters and the stories follow you into the rest of your life. I mean, I remember which book it was. I was really struggling with a lot of different plot issues as I worked out the story, and I was just obsessing about it. And I remember one night I had a dream that I was getting into a taxi cab, and I was riding the taxi cab, and in the taxi I was still thinking through the elements of the story. So it's hard to get away from them. I end up doing a fair amount of cooking and baking and things like that, and what I find is in order to make sure that it doesn't go completely off kilter, you have to really focus on what you're doing, and that's one of the few times that I can my brain forces all that other stuff aside, because I have to kind of focus on what I'm doing, and
it's the same thing.
Do something else. So.
I'm sure playing golf's the same thing for me. It's
yeah,
like,
I would
literally, but when I'm doing playing golf, I notice is I'm always plotting like 2 shots ahead, so I'm still plotting all the time. It's like going, don't go there because you're going to go there. It's like a game of chess.
But playing golf for me would do nothing but increase my frustration. So.
Oh, it's gotten better during the pandemic.
All right, Brian. How much more action do you foresee Jason's Bourne future?
Well, that's the good thing about Bourne is we're never going to run dry of dangerous situations for him. It is. I mean, the Bourne books are so different from my other novels. I mean, my other books tend to be sort of intense psychological sorts of novels, and it's really this very intricate mental puzzle. And the Bourne novels, man, there's just a lot of bodies and falling everywhere and chase scenes, and it's just fun. I mean, in the same way that you go to a Matt Damon movie or a Die Hard movie, and it's 2 hours of adrenaline. Well, I'm trying to give you that same sort of adrenaline in my Bourne books, and yet then I'm also layering in the character stuff that I think really makes Bourne come alive. So I hope the character keeps evolving and changing and becoming more interesting, and at the same time I hope he's killing people left and right for a long time to come. So.
Awesome. All right, looks like we have one more question, unless anyone wants to submit any more. For both, what are both of your writing habits or schedules like? I think we all like to know this of authors. I was in the traditional workforce for so long that I still kind of see writing as a 9-to-5 job for me. I mean, I get up in the morning and I have my coffee, and I may spend an hour or two catching up on reader emails and other sorts of marketing things. But I'm usually reading through the last several chapters that I wrote in the book that I'm working on. And that kind of pulls me and immerses me in the story again. And then I sort of black out where I'm going in the next chapter. So typically most of the words get on the page in the afternoon, it seems like. There's 3 kind of phases to the book. I mean, the first phase is the plotting and developing the characters and the settings and kind of really creating the story, which usually involves, a lot just sitting in a recliner and just, closing my eyes and staring at the ceiling and then filling up all sorts of yellow pads. And now finally, then you've got the actual getting words on the page, which is, so intense. And then finally you reach the part that I like the best, which is the editing phase. So with my 4th Bourne novel, I'm now at the part I like the best, because now I get to just tweak and play and polish and edit and get everything exactly perfect. But all the words are there. The story is done. I can just kind of polish it and get it just right. So wonderful.
See, I admire that 9-to-5 thing, because that's kind of, and I have lots of friends who are that way, and they're really all good writers. I don't do that. I think part of it's probably my television upbringing and the way we kind of work. Billy Wilder, and I've said this a lot to fellow writers and students and people I work with, who's maybe the greatest screenwriter ever, used to say in his day, when he sat down at the typewriter, it was like written. And so I'm sort of that guy, which is like, and I think part of it is when we're plotting stuff, like I've written all my novels with, well, the first 2 novels were based on a little bit of a screenplay, you know, like a 60-page thing. One, I had the first third and I finished the second one, I stretched out. But these 2 books were just an idea. And generally we write really long outlines. We talk them around. I wrote both of the Austin Grant books without a word written down on a page. I mean, I literally had an idea, but I'm always thinking about them. I'm like walking around thinking, if I do this, I do this, I do that. And then and so that to me kind of like, I do your recliner bit, but I literally would do that for, like, you know, a month, 3 months. And then I would just literally over pretty much every day, and generally get up really early from like 4:30 in the morning till about noon. I would just write, and then I'd be done that day. The next day I'd rewrite, I'd end a chapter, and I go, okay, what, you know, who's the great writer who does the LBJ books? I forget his name, but you know, he used to say, I want to go to bed knowing what the first line is of the book I'm going to write the next day. So I would finish that, and then the next day I read what I did, and I go like, think about, you know, what you're going to write tomorrow. And then on a page, write down the 5 things that have to happen. And that's just buzzwords. Like I used to be able to do outlines where I could just go bed, drink, kill, makeup. And I could go, okay, I can make that up. And then I would get that out really. And to me, the idea was like in 2 months, 3 months, I could get a, like what I call like a kitchen sink vomit draft just on the page. and I'm like, don't go back. Just never go back. Just keep going forward, you know, because I was going to say this earlier when we were chatting about writing, you know, Brian, I've always found, I remember Stephen King said this, you know, if you can't finish, I know this in screenplays and it's happened with all the books, you know, I might write 10, 12, 15 pages a day. When I get to the ending, it's like 30 pages a day. I'm going, if you can't do that, there's something wrong with the first 2/3 of your book. You know, I mean, in terms, and what ends up happening is I'll get to something like, you got to fix that earlier. Just keep going. Just keep going. And then you get to the part, and I agree. My favorite, and it's painful, but it's rewarding. But the best part is editing. I always write long. And I think because from editing my screenplays, I've spent a ton of time, like on Monarchologies. We made up the stories. I made up a lot of the stories. And then I spent all the time in the editing room with the editors. And you can go, you don't need this. You don't need this. You don't need this. Or you can make this better.
And that is, I don't think you ever finish a book. You just stop at some point.
Right. Yeah. Usually going, we need it now. Okay,
right,
great.
Exactly.
I have to hand it over now. Okay, great.
So that's my process, you know.
Wonderful. And I love how you both are different. So it gives the audience a good gist of how authors write differently and not, if there is no solid.
I will say what's interesting is
B.
I look at our 2 books and I mean the tone of the Stride books, right? Which I really like. So, you know, I love all your books, Brian, but those books were the continuing series. And I think what drew you to even liking Should I Fall better than the first one, I think they're in the same world in terms of emotion and characters. How character, you know, there's a cool plot idea, but you've picked a thing in their lives and you do that. So I think even though we write completely in different styles, I think we've become friends over the last couple of years. And I think it's like there's so much we have in common, but it's like, you know, so I think at the end of the day, it's what's really kind of cool is I'm such a fan of your work. It's like, it's really interesting to say how people go different ways about doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
Because I never had a 9-to-5 job in my life. You know, it's like, I mean, television is a job. You work for 3 or 4 months, 24/7, and then it just goes away. Like, what?
Oh, gosh. All right. Looks like we are out of questions, but I have one last one for you both. Where can people find you on social media so they can stay tuned in on what's going on?
They can find me on the web and on social media. My website is bfreemanbooks.com. That's all one word, bfreemanbooks.com. You can find me over at Twitter and Instagram, also with the tagline B Freeman Books. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/bfreemanfans. And I love hearing from readers. I love when people shoot me emails or do social media posts, and I try to reply to everyone. That for me, that's the real fun part of the job. That's
how we got in touch. I wrote you a letter.
Right.
Yeah, mine is just the best way is like I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I mean, not that much, a lot when the books are coming out and stuff, but my website's www.scottshepherdauthor, all one word.com. And it's got all the socials up there and links to the books and, the other books and a little bit of my TV stuff, but I probably should put Monarch on there since it's coming on next week. But I'll get around to that.
Wonderful. Oh, I'm glad we had you here. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you so much, Brian. Everyone who's watching, don't forget, you can still get your own copies of Should I Fall and The Bourne Sacrifice. Showing them off here. We have signed book plates while supplies last. Click the link below, or if you're watching this in the future, we will include the links to our website in the description. All right. Brian, Scott, thank you. I hope you have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thank you very much, everyone.